Hello, this is Mike. Welcome to another episode of Urban Legends and Mythology. On this episode, I am discussing a subject that I've been kind of blowing off for a long time, mostly because I feel like it's going to devolve into a series of Monty Python and Indiana Jones jokes and references, but at this point, I really don't care. I'm just going to go with it. Today, we are discussing the infamous Holy Grail. And if that damn thing does exist and I ever happen to drink from it, I hope it's filled with this delicious Rheingeist truth, because why not? So let's start at the beginning. What is the Holy Grail? Well, according to Indiana Jones, it's a bedtime story that a lot of old men would like to wake up to. You know, it's a cup that can give immortal life. It was the cup that was used at the Last Supper and the chalice used to catch the blood of Jesus when that Roman dude stabbed him. It's been searched for centuries by the likes of King Arthur and Galahad and Lancelot and everybody else from Monty Python in the search for the Holy Grail. And hell, I think it was protected by that death bunny, which is the namesake of the logo of this show. That's no ordinary rabbit. That's the most foul, cruel, and ill-tempered rodent you ever set eyes on. See, I'm less than 2 minutes into this thing, and I already can't stop with the Indiana Jones and Monty Python jokes. Like, this is basically just going to be a filler episode because it's going to be that. Yeah, I am going to touch on the religious Jesus stuff and the history of the Holy Grail, not fun stuff, yeah. But, like, I'm trying to get all the Monty Python stuff out of the way first. So bear with me here. Okay. Focus. Okay, so as always, let's start at the beginning. What is the Holy Grail? So the Holy Grail, also known as the Holy Chalice in Christian tradition, is the vessel that Jesus, their God, used at the Last Supper to serve wine. Now, the Synoptic Gospels refer to Jesus sharing a cup of wine with the apostles, saying that it was the covenant in his blood. The use of wine and chalice in the Eucharist in Christian churches is based on the Last Supper story. It's that infamous scene in the Christian mythology where Jesus, he goes, "Drink this wine, for it is my blood. Eat this bread, for it is my flesh." Blah, blah, blah. Something about Judas betraying him and all that other, Christian fairy tale stuff. There was no mention of a holy hand grenade, though, so I think the guys from Monty Python were taking a liberty with that. But who knows, maybe the holy hand grenade of Antioch was there. Christians are gonna really hate me after this episode, but most of my audience I don't think are Christians anyway. They'll probably just find it hilarious, and why not? I could just be added to that list of things that Christians hate. Big deal, I don't care. So, back to the story. I keep getting sidetracked, and I'm not editing any of this except for maybe some sound stuff on the back end. You're getting it completely raw today. So, back to the story. Jesus and all his apostle dudes, they're sitting there at the Last Supper, and I don't know where they found a place with a table that seats 24. I couldn't even find a table that seated 12 in that big giant house that I used to live in. So, good for him finding that table that's always depicted in that infamous painting. But they're sitting there and they're having the Last Supper, and the Holy Chalice is there, the Holy Grail. Now, a lot of depictions, especially from the medieval times and even in Indiana Jones, that came out in 1989, the Lost Crusade one, they all depict the Grail as being this emblazoned, gold encrusted with all the jewels and stuff. This beautiful Grail that's totally not accurate for someone who was basically a homeless wanderer who was going around just spouting his, what would become Christianity. It's kind of like this post-Jewish stuff. That wouldn't really be the cup that someone like him would be using. And even in Indiana Jones, they mentioned this, but even that cup, that prop, it's not accurate of what you would see in a first century Roman province. Now, my opinion of what that cup was made of, and you could take my word for it because do actually have a background in history, anthropology, and archaeology, so I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. No, I admit my primary area of study wasn't Europe, it was here in America. But I would bet my entire net worth that that cup was made out of some kind of ceramic, most likely clay. It was most likely some kind of clay chalice or clay bowl. I'd bet my entire net worth on it. Because think about it, we're in Judea, a province of Rome. Glass would have been a luxury item. Obviously, it wasn't made of gold or silver. That would have been a super luxury item. And what bum, and let's be honest, these guys were basically bums. They were just wandering around. They're not going to have access to that. Now, there have been some people saying that was made of onyx. That could be true, but I believe onyx was also more of a luxury item. Now, if they're in a place and they're being served wine out of most likely a clay, some kind of ceramic vessel. Those are going into clay or ceramic vessels, guaranteed. They're not going into glass, not if you're poor. And I mean, that's the whole Christian thing about poverty. Like, they embrace the fact that they were impoverished, they weren't rich. I think they have dozens of Bible articles about that, which, brings me to that whole, they're supposed to embrace poverty, but every pastor or priest or whatever, they're just swimming in riches. So, yeah, you could see that's one of the reasons why I hate the hypocrisy of that religion, but I digress. Fact of the matter is, that thing was made out of ceramic. Highly doubtful it was made out of wood, because who's going to spend that amount of time carving out a chalice of wood when you have access to all this Mediterranean trade? It's very easy to get ceramic vessels. Ceramic vessels were the glass or the plastic of their day. It's everywhere. Rheingeist truth number 2, which goes to show how fast I drink this stuff. It is very, very good. Now, just general knowledge of history and history of the Roman Empire in the 1st century and history of Judea in the 1st century can pretty much verify that this was some kind of ceramic clay vessel. Now, whether the cup used at the dinner and the cup used to capture the blood of Jesus were the same cup or 2 different cups, we're never gonna know. I would assume that it might have been 2 different cups. Who knows? Maybe somebody took that cup from that Last Supper, and since it was the next day or the day after or whatever, they still had that same cup. And why wouldn't they? Because if they believe that this is their God, yeah, you're probably going to keep that cup that he was giving you. So yeah, it's probably the same cup. But like I said, we'll never know if it was the same cup or 2 different cups. But the one question we have to ask at this point is, at the time of the crucifixion, did these people see this cup, this vessel, as sacred in and of itself? I know that they saw the man himself as sacred. They saw the blood that came out of him as sacred, but would they have seen that chalice, that cup, as sacred? Because when you think of it from a practical point of view, yeah, it's just a cup, it's just a ceramic bowl. Did they keep it and use it for other things, or was it kept as a sacred object? I mean, we have no records of them preserving this sacred cup. We also have no records of them preserving the so-called true cross or the nails that came out of that cross. Or, I mean, we do have a little bit of documentation on that so-called Spear of Destiny, which may reside in a European museum or church right now. That's followed pretty closely, but the rest of this stuff, it's just nails, it's just wood, it's just a cup. You don't really see anything sacred attached to it until about the 3rd century, about the time of Constantine the Great's mother, who is said to have gone to Jerusalem and found these artifacts and brought them back. Now, you gotta think this is over 200 years after that event, so, it could have been a so-called archaeological expedition, but you would never know. I mean, the Romans crucified people all over the empire for centuries, so it's hard to say. I mean, it's weird because even though we know it happened, wood rots away, nails get recycled. we only really have one piece in museums that actually show that the practice actually took place, and that was like just some random guy. Like, we know crucifixion took place, it was a common thing, but we really have no evidence of it. And even 200 years after that fact, you go to that site, I'm sure there were other crucifixions taking place on that site. So it all becomes lost in that muddied history. Now, in the 7th century, we do see in the account of Arcuff, he was a 7th century Anglo-Saxon pilgrim. He makes mention of a chalice venerated as the one used in the Last Supper, and it's seen in a chapel near Jerusalem. It's the only mention of the veneration of such a relic in the Holy Land. Of course, we don't really hear about it again until the Arthurian legends, which come out in the 12th century. And the Arthurian legends are really just that, legends. I mean, I do have plans on doing a whole thing about the Arthurian legends in the 3rd season, so I won't dive into it so much here. But, one of the Arthurian legends is that him and Lancelot and Galahad and other knights of the Round Table, they did search for the Holy Grail. And I'll go into that story later. However, they never find it. I don't believe they ever find it. I mean, even in the Monty Python film, they don't actually find it. I mean, for one, how does the Holy Grail end up in England in the first place and guarded by Death Bunny? That is a conundrum. Then again, it's also a conundrum as to why there are French people in a Norman tower or Norman castle in the 4th or 5th century, which is when Arthur was supposed to have reigned. I guess that's a good justification for why he asked them why they're in England, because they're in England about 400, 500 years before they're supposed to be. Then again, who doesn't love that back and forth? What are you doing in England? None of your business. Now go away. Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries. Which, by the way, is a really great joke that I think goes over a lot of people's heads. Elderberries, for those who don't know, can be used to make mead or certain types of wine. And it's basically saying your father was a drunk, which I don't know why I'm clarifying it here. I'm just kind of falling back into the Monty Python thing, but that's where the beer and the subject matter is taking me for now. So let's just go with it. Now, there are 2 artifacts that are claimed to be the Holy Chalice in Western Christianity, and this comes up in the later medieval period. The first is the Santo Calice, which is an agate cup, and it resides in the Cathedral of Valencia. It's purportedly from around the 1st century AD, and even Pope Benedict XVI in 2006 says this most famous chalice, he believed that this was the Holy Grail. I find that very hard to believe because agate, it's a metamorphic rock. It's from, I think it's volcanic rock, I'm not sure. It's from Greece, and it was primarily used in jewelry, so I find it hard to believe that such a luxury chalice would have been there at the Last Supper amongst 12 vagrants hanging out in Judea. Now, the second is called the Sacro Catino, and that's in the Genoa Cathedral. It's basically a flat dish made of green glass, and it was recovered in Caesarea in 1101. It wasn't identified as a holy chalice until much later, towards the end of the 13th century, but I also find it hard to believe that this green glass chalice or plate or bowl or whatever is the so-called Holy Grail, because, like I said, it's a luxury item. Glass was not common in the 1st century AD in Rome. And that's the point I'm trying to drive home, is all these fancy glass and bronze and gold and all this stuff, it's not common in that era, in that time, and it's not going to be accessible by a guy who was literally, a wandering teacher, wandering priest or whatever, and lived that poverty lifestyle. And I mean, my God, he was practically he's almost like Diogenes when it comes to his poverty. So he's not going to be walking around with a gold chalice in the middle of freaking Judea in the 1st century AD. No, he's going to be drinking out of some, like, ghetto cheap ceramic goblet, you know? I don't know why they attribute all this gold. I mean, I get it. They're like, oh, he's the King of Kings, blah, blah, blah. It has to be a gold chalice, blah, blah, blah. And they're really putting themselves in that, like, idea of, like, oh, it's a gold chalice, and, you know, it comes back to that hypocrisy garbage that makes me hate their religion so much. But I digress again. You know, they want to see it as a golden chalice. And even I've heard preachers, because my ex-wife, she used to drag me to church early in our marriage because, you know, she's a dedicated Christian. I'm not. I tried to be, and I failed miserably at it. As an archaeologist with a scientific background, well, former archaeologist with a scientific background, my mind just doesn't buy into that garbage. I saw right through their charlatanism, but even then, they were like, yeah, we're going to get to heaven, and we're going to walk on streets made of gold, and it's going to be awesome, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, you guys completely missed the whole point. And I think this preacher that she used to drag me to, I think he knew that I knew he was a charlatan because he was really buddy-buddy with me. And I'm really good at seeing through, like, let's just be honest, bullshit. And I think he knew that. And I think he knew on his end that he was just in that position to make money because that dude was rich. I mean, his daughter and his, like, son-in-law, they own a local, like, burger franchise here in town. So they're in it for the money. They all are. But I'm going off onto a rant about Christianity now. But let's get back to the subject matter. And there are a few other candidates that claim to have been this holy chalice. One is actually made of emerald, one is made of silver, one is actually made of wood, but that was debunked as, I believe they were like also claiming it was made of the true cross, and it's like, how can it be made of the true cross and also be the chalice that was caught to catch his blood while he was on the cross? So a lot of the ones that have been, quote, found and are in these displays and in these churches and stuff, they're not real. They're not that actual clay goblet or clay cup or clay bowl that was present at the crucifixion. So general knowledge just says that the thing was lost to time, which, you know, given enough time, any ceramic vessel or whatever is going to deteriorate. I mean, even in desert conditions, they eventually deteriorate and break down. I mean, here in Ohio, like, if you find a piece of ceramic the size of your pinky nail, you hit the jackpot because our soil's really acidic and that stuff is just not found. And that's why, like, in like places like Ohio, West Virginia, this like humid, almost subtropical now because of climate change you really preserve just about every artifact you find because it rots so fast, as opposed to like out west in the Southwest, you do still find big chunks of ceramic and stuff, but even those are broken up and very delicate and stuff. The point I guess I'm making is stuff breaks down over time, and given enough time, it's just going to turn to dust. I believe that clay bowl or that clay goblet or whatever turned to dust a couple of hundred or maybe even several hundred years after the Last Supper. You know, it was discarded, it broke, something happened to it, and it was lying in probably a trash pit until it disintegrated into nothing. But despite that, it really makes you wonder where this idea of this holy chalice, this Holy Grail comes from. And it really comes from the medieval mindset, especially the medieval mindset of the Catholic Church. You know, this is generally pre-Lutheranism, so we're talking up until about the 1500s. But at the time, if your church or your cathedral or whatever had a holy relic, whether it be like a piece of like a finger from a saint, or, you know, the Holy Grail, or a piece of the true cross, or the spear of destiny, or whatever, you know, that was gonna bring in pilgrims And why do you want to bring in pilgrims to your church? Because those pilgrims are going to spend money, and that was the whole point. You wanted to have some kind of artifact or some kind of piece of like a monk or a saint. You wanted some relic to be the centerpiece of your church or cathedral. You wanted to draw in that crowd, and the bigger it is, the more crowd you're going to draw in. It all comes back to money, because once you have that money, once you have those pilgrims, you have that money, you're not only going to fund stuff in your community, you're going to send that money back to the Catholic Church, churchy people in Rome, or you're just going to hoard it all because, churches historically have been always corrupt in that sense. But I digress. But like, if you could say, hey, we have the Holy Grail, we have the cup that Jesus drank from, that's going to attract a lot of people. And that's what kind of entices people to seek out this grail, to seek out the Holy Grail. And, you even see expeditions up until the 1930s. The Nazis in Germany, one of them, an SS officer, he was actually an archaeologist, and he was tasked with finding the Holy Grail. And it's kind of cool because it somewhat inspires that last crusade. Hell, it even inspires that first Indiana Jones movie, because the Nazis were always sending out archaeologists to look for these relics. And the story with that guy is actually kind of tragic, because he was a great archaeologist. May have been a little skewed because of the Nazi party, but he was an SS officer. But it turned out that he was a homosexual, and he wasn't really that secretive about it. He was kind of a proud homosexual, and that didn't really flesh with that mindset. And it's thought that the Nazi party maybe murdered him. I know he had resigned from the SS at that point. However, he was found frozen to death, like next to like a giant thing of ice on a mountain in, I think it was the Alps. And it's really tragic. This great archaeologist could have went on to do great things, got mixed up with like the most evil organization on the planet, and ends up dead because of it, while seeking out like one of the great mythological icons of the time. Because the Nazis, they saw it like Pokemon. They wanted to collect all these religious icons and all this stuff and put it in a museum and have people be like, yeah, it gives us all the power in the world. That's kind of why like Hitler wanted the spear of destiny and all that garbage. And it really influences the Indiana Jones genre, because two of those three, we're not going to talk about that other one that should have never been made, that embarrassment. However, there is a fifth one coming out, but it's like, how is like 78-year-old Indiana Jones gonna be like, is he still, like, I saw the preview for it, the Dial of Destiny, he's like falling out of a plane and he's still cracking the whip, and this is like in the 70s, and like, who's his arch nemesis gonna be? I'm guessing it's gonna be the Soviets, but like, he's doing all this stuff in his 70s, and it's like, dude, by the 70s, archaeology had really become its own science. You weren't just going out and stealing artifacts anymore. I'm gonna watch it. I am gonna watch it, but I'm not going to be too impressed. Ryan Geist truth number 3. I mean, speaking of that, I might be impressed if, like, Short Round were to come back, like 40-year-old Short Round. He'd be like, Short Round, since you've been gone, I found the Holy Grail and I dropped it down a chasm in Petra, which they never really explain why the Holy Grail ends up in Petra, of all places. It has, like, no connection to the Holy Grail or anything in Christianity at all. But he'd be like, Short Round, I dropped the chalice in Petra down a chasm, and my slam piece at the time went with her, but I guess it's not bad because I found out that my father was also, sleeping with my slam piece, which kind of, I know they played it off as a joke in the film because, there's that scene where Sean Connery's like, oh, she talks in her sleep, and then he's like, oh, dude, I've, been, having sex with, my dad's, slam piece, and luckily in my life I'll never experience that because me and my dad have completely different opposite tastes in women, which is nice. However, it's played off as a joke in the movie, but if that were to happen in real life, that would probably traumatize somebody. Be like, dude, I've just been hooking up with this chick, and then I find out that my dad's hooking up with the same chick, and it's I guess it's a good thing she did fall down that chasm and die, because if she didn't, a couple weeks later, it would be like Indiana Jones and the Legend of the Mysterious Paternity Test. Is it my son or is it my brother? Let's find out. It could have launched Jerry Springer in the 40s. It would have been great. But maybe Short Round comes back and he's like, Short Round, I dropped the chalice down a chasm, and then somehow I was in a nuclear explosion and I survived it by being in a lead-lined refrigerator, because apparently this is a parallel universe where lead doesn't melt at the surface temperature of the sun. And I actually remember watching that in the theater when it came out, and I even yelled out in the middle of the theater when I saw that scene. He dives into that refrigerator that's lead-lined, and I was like, look, he can dive in there and he can melt. And it got a big laugh in the theater. And it was so ridiculous that I'm like, my God, this film sucks. I really hope that the 5th film doesn't suck that bad or have those gross leaps in logic, but who knows. But now I'm way off subject, so Holy Grail, what can we say about it? It was a cup. It was present at the Last Supper. It was probably present during the crucifixion. And if you're me, that thing turned to dust centuries ago and we'll never find it. However, it has become an allegory. Kind of like the same way El Dorado becomes an allegory for that thing that you're always seeking that you might never find, be it wealth or love or success or whatever you're looking for. That becomes your El Dorado, that becomes your Holy Grail. It becomes a metaphor, which I think in the realm of metaphor and myth and legend, that's where it should stay. Maybe even in the realm of fiction via the Arthurian legends and whatnot. However, if you do ever seek it out, be sure to arm yourself with the holy hand grenade of Antioch. Count only to 3, not to 4 or 5 or 1 or 2. And be sure to know the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow. And I would recommend both the European and African varieties. And in case you're wondering, that film is actually where the Death Bunny kind of name comes from. That's the name I use for my logo. I did create that logo on Canva, which is an app on my phone, and I originally created it as just kind of a joke because I assumed that this podcast would be humorous, because the original idea was I was going to make fun of all this stuff in a tongue-in-cheek fashion. However, I don't really go into the origins of why Death Bunny is a thing. It's a Monty Python reference, and it's probably one that will never go away because I actually love that logo that I created. The one I created for season 2, especially that one, because it kind of also has that Follow the Rabbit Matrix vibe to it. If you remember the Matrix movie from 1999 where I had that tattoo, it was Follow the Rabbit. I didn't even think about that until a fan actually mentioned that to me on a podcast group that I'm on Facebook, because, they have Instagram and TikTok and all this stuff. Well, I'm an old school millennial. I don't use that. I use Facebook. So that's the best place to contact me. But I digress. But what I'm getting around is this is literally where the Death Bunny logo comes from. And that's on my business cards, and it's on my stickers, and any other merchandise I plan on creating and selling in the future if this thing ever gets beyond like the 100 or whatever listeners it has now. And to be honest, I really don't know. I don't really look at my analytics that often. Generally, whenever I do look at my analytics, I'm not really looking at the numbers or the downloads. I'm just looking to see if it's hit any new countries, which is always fun for me. But I'm getting way off topic here. Basically, as always, if you like what I'm doing, feel free to support it in any way you want to. Subscribe to it. Spam your friends with my links. Spam your friends with my links to that donation thing to subscribe. I think it's like 99 cents a month up to like $9 a month. Hell, if you could spare $10 a month, that would really go towards my goal of upgrading to a more dynamic type microphone. Other than this old school like Raspberry Pi ghetto setup I have, I can really take this podcast to the next level. And in that sense, I am working on season 3. I have the entire season mapped out, and that is going to be the darkest season I have ever done. Like, this season is almost done. It's fun. There's only 4 more episodes left of the season finale. Next season, we're going hardcore dark. So, if you haven't already noticed, I've changed it to explicit only. And we're going to get into some really messed up stuff next season. These first 2 seasons were experimental. This is like hardcore where we go gangbusters. It's going to be awesome. I have big plans for future seasons. And on that note, I do thank you for listening. Share this with everybody. Spam their inboxes. I spam everybody. I actually got 30-day banned from like Facebook Messenger or something because I was spamming my podcast link to like everybody, and they thought it was some kind of like spam fraud. But like it, subscribe it, listen, whatever, support it, donate, whatever. That just helps out the show. Hell, even if you want to send me beer, get a hold of me. I will give you my personal address and you can send me beer. If it's Rheingeist Truth or Rheingeist Knowledge, I will be ecstatic. Anything to help out the show. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next episode. And the season finale is coming up. It is going to be awesome. You're going to love it.